Good evening and welcome to 1010, your top 10 news in 10 minutes. I'm Andy Hong, and this is, in fact, our new studio and a little wider, a little more air, a little more space. Hopefully, this improves our ability to give you the best of our services. There's much more space beyond where I'm sitting, so we might be able to try new things, but let's leave that for a later day. Also, if there's any noise, we apologize. We're taking care of that right now. Also, can you believe it? It's already April. I know it snowed in the east again, but the year is already 25% done. Mind-blowing. Let's talk about climate. The high pressure system sitting on top of California has left the entire state in one of the most severe droughts that it has ever recorded. Forget about rainfall in the coming months. In some areas, we don't even have half the last year's amount of snowpack in the Sierra Nevadas. And NASA does a good job outlining how important that snowpack is for us. In normal years, snowfall supplies about 70% of California's annual precipitation, melting in the spring and early summer. The greater the snowpack water content, the greater the likelihood California's reservoirs will receive ample runoff to meet the state's water demands in the summer and fall. In other words, we just have to batten down the hatches and ride out the summer and hope for rain next winter. Consequently, the state legislature passed a mandatory 25% reduction in water usage, especially in outdoor irrigation, which, according to CBS, accounts for 60% of domestic water use. In my opinion, we definitely need to cut down on grass lawns, golf courses, and palm trees. Those don't belong in California's current climate, although sorry to you all golf fans. We have new developments on the investigation on the crash of Germanwings Flight 9525, which went down in the French Alps after a controlled descent last week. Investigators who suspected foul play by psychologically troubled co-pilot Andreas Lubitz found more evidence to support their claim when they looked through Lubitz's personal tablet computer and recovered the second black box from the crash site. German prosecutors announced on Thursday that Lubitz had been researching suicide methods in the cockpit locking mechanism, which Lubitz used to lock the captain of the flight out of the cockpit on the day of the crash. In addition, the flight data recorder recovered from the crash showed that Lubitz had, in fact, given the command to lock the cockpit door, reset the autopilot altitude settings to 100 feet, and manually applied the throttle to accelerate the descent, thus providing crucial evidence suggesting that 1. Lubitz brought down the plane, and 2. The crash might have been premeditated by Lubitz. All 150 bodies of the passengers have been recovered, but there is still a lot of work to be done, as you can see in the video released by the French Interior Ministry and provided via The Telegraph. Lufthansa, the parent company of Germanwings, confirmed on Tuesday that it had known about Lubitz's risk of having depressive episodes 6 years ago. There is no doubt the airline too will be under some questioning. In Kenya, the third major terrorist attack in the East African nation in the past 20 years claimed almost 150 lives. The terrorist group Al-Shabaab, based in Somalia and also responsible for the 2013 attacks on a Kenyan mall, attacked Garissa University College in Nairobi, the capital of Kenya. At 5:30 a.m. local time on Thursday, the attackers stormed the front gates of the school, and when the attack ended 15 hours later, 147 people were dead. Many of the dead were Christians who were specifically targeted by the terrorists. As Kenya, a nation with an 80% Christian population, faces more terrorist attacks from groups located in next-door neighbor Somalia, the government and people of the nation are to face more crises to come. Just a few hundred miles north of Somalia is Yemen, which recently broke down into anarchy as 3 parties, the government, the rebels, and the terrorists, fight for control over the nation. Saudi Arabia, the major political power of the region, recently began airstrikes against the rebels to protect the sovereignty of the government. On Wednesday, however, Saudi Arabia saw its first military death when the border guard was killed in a border skirmish. While Saudi Arabia and its allies clash with Yemeni rebels and their Iranian supporters, the Al-Qaeda branch in Yemen is having a grand time. On Thursday, Al-Qaeda fighters attacked a prison in Al-Mukalla, a coastal city, where they managed to free 270 prisoners, of which 1/3, according to CNN, have links to the terrorist group Al-Qaeda. If you're listening carefully, you might have noticed that I mentioned Iran as an opponent to Saudi Arabia in the war in Yemen. Yes, America is supporting Saudi Arabia against Iran in Yemen, but it's also fighting with Iran, along with Saudi Arabia, against ISIS in Iraq. It's complicated. Yesterday, though, Iran, the United States, and 5 other world powers reached a landmark agreement in stopping Iran from developing nuclear weapons in exchange for gradually lifting heavy economic and political sanctions that have been imposed for decades. Many Iranians are glad that the economic sanctions that have been in place since the revolution in 1979 will slowly be lifted. Excuse me. But the Israeli government, as well as some American politicians, remain dissatisfied with the deal. The U.S. State Department released the details of the deal. For the next 15 years, Iran will be allowed to keep its nuclear facilities, albeit with production limits, and for civilian use only. It will be required to reduce the number of uranium enrichment centrifuges by 2/3 and the amount of partially enriched uranium from, according to the New York Times, 10,000 to 300 kilograms. It will also have to redesign a deuterium oxide plant to make it unable to produce plutonium. And finally, in exchange for all of these cuts, Iran will receive relief from the sanctions that it has been suffering under. Should Iran violate these deals? Well, it's only been a day since the deal was reached. Let's be happy for now. Woo. Back in the United States, the state of Indiana is in a political mess as protesters fought to get rid of a religious freedom law that allowed institutions to refuse service to homosexual individuals on grounds of religious beliefs. Both proponents and opponents of the law argue that it's a matter of freedom and anti-discrimination. One side argues that the law protects the freedom of religious groups, while the other says that it violates the freedom of LGBT men and women. Many businesses and organizations, such as Apple and the NCAA, poured intense pressure on Indiana Governor Mike Pence to repeal or at least revise the law. This pressure, combined with the already ongoing protests throughout the state, made the state legislature give in and motion for a revision, which Governor Pence approved. It's good to see the politicians, upon seeing that the people are not satisfied with the law, go and try to remedy the situation. Of course, all this uproar would not have happened had the people been more involved and enthusiastic about politics before the feces had a chance to hit the fan. And if you think Washington, D.C. is any better, think again. Senator Robert Mendez pleaded not guilty when faced with, according to CNN, 14 criminal counts against him, 8 of which involved bribery in his dealings with Solomon Melgen, a Florida ophthalmologist and friend. The indictment was 68 pages long and painted a pretty ugly picture, almost $1 million in contributions, trips, and privileges. Well, late Argentinian prosecutor Alberto Nisman had a much longer indictment against President Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner for covering up the AMIA bombing, the deadliest terrorist attack in Argentinian history. Yet Nisman was killed and the charges were dropped. We'll need more evidence and see how this plays out in the future. Sometimes the accused go on the offensive and become the accuser, such as the case of Robert Durst, who was arrested last month in New Orleans for an apparent confession of the disappearance of his wife in 1982 and the murder of his friend in 2000 in an HBO documentary called The Jinx. Durst's defense lawyers, however, were not concerned about what Durst may have done in the past. Instead, they argued that the arrest itself was illegal, which, in a strict constructionist view, was technically illegal. The authorities only applied for an arrest warrant 11 hours after the arrest and procured a handgun and some marijuana without a search warrant. It may seem like nitpicking, because it is, but this is still a valid argument to have in order to uphold legal justice and propriety in the United States. America. In North Carolina, a 37-year-old Louis Jordan was rescued after 66 days at sea. His fishing trip took a bad turn when the sailing boat capsized and rendered the main mast as well as all of his electronics useless. He survived on raw fish and rainwater when his supplies ran out. That is, until a German ship found him and called the Coast Guard. Finally, tonight, for Science News, we have another case of American ingenuity. At Duke University Medical Center's Preston Robert Titch Brain Tumor Center, Dr. Henry Friedman, on the bottom left of the picture, and his colleagues managed to find a way to cure glioblastoma, a rare form of brain cancer, with polio. Doctors injected tumor-sensitive poliovirus into the tumor, thereby 1. Infecting only the tumor cells, and 2. Marking the cells as clear targets for the immune system, which now see the tumor cells as a threat to the body. Clinical trials have yielded successful results. In a CBS 60 Minutes interview, Dr. Friedman remarked that this is the most promising therapy he's seen in his career, period. Excuse me. In another interview, Dr. Matthias Grellmeyer told CBS that the same practice of immunotherapy has already been done for lung cancers, breast cancers, colorectal cancers, prostate cancers, pancreatic cancers, liver cancers, renal cancers, and that we probably see this in just about any type of cancer you can imagine. Hopefully, someday, somehow, cancers as a leading cause of death will be a thing of the past. And on that happy note, and some really dusty air. We conclude the 1010 news for this week. I'm Andy Hong. Make sure to like us on Facebook and YouTube. And have a great Easter Sunday tomorrow. We'll be back next Friday with more of your top 10 news in 10 minutes. Stay educated.